Let me guess. He dies at the end.
Big yikes.
Christin has backwards books.
I do.
Oh, no.
Can you write my obituary?
That's insane to me. We're talking about death. We're talking about disease. We're talking about living a life of maybe regret. Welcome to today.
We're going to talk about Tolstoy. Nice Russian music for the intro.
What is this book? What are we doing here?
We're looking at the Death of Ivan Illyich.
It's a collection of multiple short stories. We just read this one because we're kind of lazy sometimes.
I thought it was only a few pages in this book. And I
Oh,
was
no,
like,
it's like a short story.
quarter of this book. It is not that short of a story.
It is like 50 pages.
The font is really small.
But there's like chapters in there, so you can like hit mile markers as you're reading it. I think it's a pretty achievable short story read in a week.
And then why did we pick this book?
We're talking about death. We're talking about disease. We're talking about living a life of maybe regret and maybe not.
I thought it's because we saw it mentioned on Severance.
I consider that to be a sign from the universe.
Oh, okay.
A summary of the story, spoiler alert, a well-to-do man, a magistrate. He decides people's fates in the Russian legal system in the late 1800s. He's living like a solidly, let's say, like upper middle class Russian life, gets injured one day, and then basically dies 3 months later. And he spends that time being like, oh no, I've lived a life and I think it might have been the wrong one.
Big yikes.
Big yikes.
So this is a wake-up call story. I realized that, like, as I was reading it, that it's actually meant to be a dark comedy.
What gave you that impression?
First of all, I was like, oh no, they have really long Russian names to remember. But then I realized that the small yikes turned into really big yikes to the point of like, holy molies, how terrible everyone is in this story and how they deal with their, friend and partner's death is so exaggerated that I think this was meant to be satire. And I feel like if you film this story, I'll film it like Arrested Development. You can't believe people are actually like that. Well, what does your face mean?
Have you read any other Russian kind of fiction?
I understand. Like, there's also Russian writers and how they write things. They talk about sadness in a very visceral way, and that it's just like how they do it, and they're doing it straight. Whereas, like, I'm interpreting it as like, this is so comically terrible that I interpret it as comedy. So there is like that layer of like personal interpretation going on. Who knows? Tolstoy is dead. You actually can't prove like whether I'm right or you're right. But there is this like open interpretation here where like this could be really good comedy.
I'm not like a Russian fiction expert, but I'm fascinated by Russian culture, partially because I needed to study it while I was in the army. I like Russian culture because literature in a lot of ways is like fundamentally like dry and straight. I do agree that there's like elements of comedy in it, but it's funny because it's so serious. It is just a different way of viewing the world than Americans. It's a lot more matter of fact. It's a lot more misery is endemic to this, and we need to look at this straight on. But it is not an optimistic culture. And that doesn't mean it's like a worse culture. It's just not optimistic by default like Americans are.
You were telling me that, this is actually one of his later works after he had his spiritual awakening.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's why he wrote this story the way he did, as like a Christmas carol, like a ghost of the Christmas past sort of situation, right? And I didn't realize he had such a huge influence on Gandhi.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know about that.
Yeah, they like Mahatma Gandhi when he was young wrote to Tolstoy.
Oh, that's dope.
And then Tolstoy was the one who was promoting the idea of non-harm and like non-violent protesting. He came from aristocratic origins, but then he ended up in the military as well because he had crippling gambling debts.
Hell yeah.
Nothing much has changed. He was not in a happy marriage, which, is maybe evident by some of his like more famous stories. He almost renounced his stories too, like his like War and Peace and Anna Karenina. He was like, these are not important. Like this story is way more important. With that, let's move on to obituaries and funerals. Beginning of the story, you read about Ivan's funeral obituary situation, right? And I immediately went to ChatGPT to be like, can you write my obituary?
Strange move, in my opinion.
I was actually curious whether there's enough material about me online for it to do that. It was really comprehensive. But I thought it was a really good way for me to reflect, if I keel over tomorrow, is it good enough? In terms of a funeral, it decided that I wanted a TED Talk / meditation retreat, and then I was annoyed by how accurate that is. The funeral has to be the best party ever. And I will like haunt as a ghost to make sure that it is good.
Why?
Because I want all my friends to get to know each other. Because of the whole
Why?
isolation situation that you were talking about earlier. I feel like I have many friends who don't know each other, and they're also in smaller friend circles. So it'll be good if like the funeral can be an excuse for party. In the past, when I had more energy, I usually plan my birthdays that way too. I'll invite people from different circles so we have a
Yeah.
reason to mingle, especially post-COVID. There's not enough events and planning for people to get to know each other. And then if you don't have the more connector types plan things, people will never get together.
We're so different, Kristen. We're
Yes,
so
that's the
unbelievably
point.
different. Everything that you've just said is so foreign to me that I don't
Mhm.
even know how to respond.
And it only makes sense if everybody enjoys it and wants to go out. It's
So
just a
so
gift
strange.
and you can take it or leave it.
Wanted to ask a little bit more about the story.
Oh, yeah.
There's a big theme in there of work as a distraction.
Mm.
Did you have a gut reaction to that?
This is the part where it was very much like a Patrick Bateman American Psycho situation, right? Because he was like
Really?
comparing himself to his peers. Like it might as well just start talking about Paul Allen and business cards.
So I interpreted that whole section very differently from you. Like,
Oh,
for context, coming from where he came from, he does well enough to trade that up into a promotion. He does well enough
Mhm.
to trade that into a promotion.
Mhm.
But it's not like the path to be a titan of Wall Street. Even at its like apex, he's like the big wig in a like relatively medium-sized town.
Mhm.
For me, the context of it all isn't that this is a commentary on like American exceptionalism and business tycoons and like being at the top of the stratosphere and pure keeping up with the Joneses, although there is like a big element of comparing yourself to other people in the like
Mhm.
relative sense.
Mhm.
Because he's not looking at the leaders of Russia and being like, I'm trying to get into that sphere. He's like, what is like the next A minus I can get? Even at his peak, he's still struggling with paying for the stuff that he wants to pay for, which is just like a little bit nicer desk and chairs and house and apartments. But like not in the same way that a 80s excess novel, I think, comes across. Because that's very much like this is a group of people that is fundamentally different from most people.
Mhm.
It's like a person who's doing better than most other people, but it's still a person, if that makes sense. He's like definitely not a peasant, but he's definitely
Mhm.
not like a Richie Rich.
A middle class person given the communist situation.
I kind of read parts of this as like a horror story.
Yes. Yeah, same here. This is you. Kind of
Yeah,
like
like I know a ton of different versions of this person, and I know you do too.
I think this is
Murderer.
where like our views don't match up. I think that Patrick Bateman is actually an everyman story.
That's insane to me.
I think we are like when we're feeling a little bit narcissistic, we're not that far from Patrick Bateman.
Kristen, Patrick Bateman worked at a top Wall Street
Yeah, but
firm,
I mean,
eating
he's
at
just
$1,000 a meal restaurants.
sure the economic amounts are different, but it's about externalizing self-worth.
In terms of like all stories about humans are about humans, yeah. But I think like
Yeah.
the details of the story really change it.
I think it goes back to like how like the range of experiences and how we interpret them. I see it as much more squashed, and you see
Yeah.
it as more wide.
We can disagree on this, obviously, but like a Patrick Bateman mentality of the world is a
Mhm.
very different thing than even the mayor of a town in Arkansas. It's like a very different level of success, and the way that you move through the world is also very different.
I see it as a spectrum.
Of course, it's a spectrum, but a spectrum implies there's differences.
Oh, I don't think so. I think I see it as like a range in a spectrum and not really implied difference unless you're talking about like extreme ends of each one. But anyway, back to your point
Well,
about
okay, I want to drill down on this because
Mhm.
if there is no difference, how do you write a class story ever?
I think it's very tricky. I think, do I relate to the richest person in the world? Probably not. But I see the flaws of him as like a version of my flaws. That's why like there is a relatability, even though there is not. And I'm sure he doesn't want to relate to me, so it's fine.
Part of me feels that it's narcissistic to feel that, but it's also narcissistic to deny it exists. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? But for me, like my interpretation of this story, the position really matters because there's a bajillion stories about how becoming rich and famous, like people regret that.
Ah, I see. Yeah.
And then there's
I
a
see.
bajillion stories about how crappy it is to like stay poor forever, right? But there's
Mhm.
like, you know, redeeming qualities to it.
Mhm.
There's not that many stories where you have a like respectable, moderate amount of success
Mhm.
where you're going about doing all the right things in like this like everyday kind of mentality in terms of like whatever your version of the American dream is, the Russian dream. And even though you do this like delicate middle path of like, oh, you're not greed, avarice, excess, but also you've pulled yourself up by your bootstraps, like even in this middle ground, there's a way to royally screw it up. And that's what's really fascinating to me about this.
I feel like there's the financial aspects and also the relational aspects. I think he really regretted not having good relationships. Is that the impression that you got?
Kind of. I got the sense that he had a revelation that all the things that he spent his time on weren't that meaningful to him. The alternative isn't very clear to me. I think that there's hints at it in terms of the relationship with his son, the relationship with one of his like servants, who he just like appreciated in honestly kind of a patronizing way.
He was trying to say the word forgive on his deathbed. And I think it's left a little bit unclear or like into open interpretation by the reader as to what, like who or what is being forgiven here.
What do you think that moment means?
I think it's self-forgiveness, actually. I think
Okay.
he was going through the whole moment of like, I, regret like all the things that I've done that were not a good use of my time, right? But like he was able to forgive himself.
Interesting.
I'm not sure, actually.
Yeah. I don't know if there's a right answer. I would lean it more towards a forgive me, putting myself in his shoes, having lived versions of this life at various points in my life. I think it's a forgive me for not being the person in a relationship that like I kind of think would have been a better way to do it. I also think there's an element of I forgive you for being shitty, but that's like for his own benefit. Okay, so here's
the wife,
like
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like obviously marrying somebody that you don't actually care about, both parties are at fault. There is a overall societal dynamic in there in that inherent power imbalances between men and women.
Right. This book did not pass the Bechdel test.
No. And so like Tolstoy wrote a lot of women as like very flat and like as set pieces, not as people.
Yeah.
Like in general, there is a flat perspective about the motivations of women characters in a lot of his stories, right? He just cared more about what men think. And that's kind of a default male state is like, I care about what men think and how they're thinking about things, and I don't really care about women. It's important, I think, to read this story through that lens.
Someone
But
should rewrite this story from the lens of the wife.
I mean, go for it. The work piece itself is really, really interesting. He is proactively at different parts of the book leaning into work as a way to not deal with the insurmountable facts of his life.
Oh,
He knows he's dying pretty early in the diagnosis. You know what I mean?
you're right. Yeah.
This really hits home to me because I get a lot of sense of self-worth from the things that I do. Men in general sometimes naturally do this, but for the most part are socialized to only perceive their value through the things that they produce. I'm not taking that away from like women, but like as a dude that has lived a dude life in America, nobody cares about how you feel. They care about what you do and what value you're bringing to that context. And I think there's good parts to that, but I also think that there's like a fundamental misalignment in meaning if that's all you think about. You know what I mean? And so in this context, he gets his entire sense of self-worth from his job, explicitly at the expense of his relationship at points. Like whenever he has a fight, he works harder at his job, right? Like that's like a hallmark of their domestic life. I do that. I do that all the time because it's way easier to focus on the thing that you're good at, the thing that continually rewards you for performing at, and like shutting out, compartmentalizing these other pieces so that you can continue to get the dopamine bursts of, hey, external system is telling me I'm doing a good job.
Right.
And like as it progresses and it becomes clearer and clearer that like this job part is a futile thing, he still leans into it further until he like physically can't anymore and he starts getting bad at the job. And then like when he gets bad at the job, he starts being like, dang it, I can't even be good at this thing anymore. So I guess I'll just like sit in this sickness. Nobody says that shit.
So Cameron, we're dying.
We are dying. He's been dying this whole time, even before this illness.
Does it come back down to relationships then?
I don't think so. I think Actually, what do you mean? I don't want to disagree with you without hearing what you mean by relationships.
Okay, so what is the moral that we all take away from the story? To
I mean,
me, it re-emphasizes the importance of enjoyment of your experiences beyond work, be it relationships or like spiritual pursuits or whatever you want. Personally, you have to not regret it. For you, what is that about?
it's a continual pursuit of stuff that I just like doing.
Oh.
People used to be able to be like, hey, I'm doing the right thing because I'm following, these 10 commandments or whatever.
Mhm.
A lot of people don't like abide by that anymore. And so you got to
Mhm.
construct your own meaning. Some people get it by joining cults. Other people get it by whittling wood.
Mhm.
And that's not like a diminutive like thing about whittling wood. We live in a world where you got to like make money. There's like constraints on our life. And so for me, this is like a tale of really reminding yourself to figure out what you actually want to default to. How you spend your time is how you spend your life. He spent his time doing this like work thing. Like he could hit checkpoints on and get a lot of value in one little facet of his life. But it clearly wasn't enough for these other pieces. Maybe a better relationship with his like wife and children would have helped. Maybe him learning how to, play an instrument would have helped. I think it's really hard to say. For me, it's really like none of it actually matters. And so you have to just do the stuff that generally lets you feel good about getting through the different hours of your day, which is just a different way of saying what you said.
I think like it really points to the fact that you and I differ maybe in this way. Like I think I use creative pursuits as an excuse to build relationships actually. Like I don't like creativity.
What?
I know. I know.
What?
Yeah.
Yo,
Whereas
oh,
you
we're so
you
different.
yeah, which is okay.
Oh.
Which is
Yeah,
like,
no,
you know,
I just didn't.
yeah.
Kristen, I think my favorite part about this whole process of reading this short story is, do you remember the scene in Severance? Spoiler alert, the wife's like prison cell bedroom thing. It's a book on her shelf. And so her prison guard doctor comes in, he sees that that's a book that like she'd been reading,
Mhm.
and he picks it up and he's just like, the Death of Ivan Illyich. Let me guess, he dies at the end. And then, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? And then I think she smacks him in the face with a chair. I could be misremembering that part. Him trash talking this book in that scene is really, really fascinating because he's right. He does die at the end. But the point isn't that he dies. The point is that he reflects on his life and how everything that he's been doing was the wrong thing.
We actually have to rate the book too. I forgot.
Quick recap. We have a triple C rating system here.
yeah.
1C from Cameron, 1C from Kristen, 1C from chat. Just comment on the video below and let us know if you would recommend this to somebody.
I do rate it as a C. However, I think the format needs to change for a lot of people. I'm not sure if it's that easy to read. And I wonder if it should be like a visual format or comic book or something. Like that might be a lot more accessible for a lot of people.
I will give this a C, and part of that recommendation is because it's not accessible. I don't think truth has to be accessible. I don't think revelation can be spoon-fed to you. It depends on the context, circumstance, but like nobody cares about a fundamental truth of the world that somebody pre-chewed and spit into their mouth like a baby bird.
Regurgitated truth.
Some things that are fundamentally true about people are like trite and a trope and like overused, whatever, but it's stuck around because it's like a real thing, even if you've heard it since you were 5 years old watching a cartoon. I don't think 18-year-old Cameron could have read this and really been like, oh wow, this changed my life. I think I would have read it and been like, man, getting old is gonna suck, and then moved on with my day and like, shotgun a beer or whatever. And
Yeah.
so 32-year-old Cameron reads this and I'm like, I could see myself falling off a ladder and dislodging my kidney and almost dying as a result of it, because like bad things have happened to me, right? I broke my foot. I've hurt my back. I've done all these things. The gift of understanding your mortality, you have to earn it in some ways. Not saying that people can't understand it or think they understand it. I know I wouldn't have if it'd been fed to me on a silver platter. Maybe they make a manga out of this. Maybe that helps a bunch of people, and like that would be a net good thing.
Well, the whole point of this show is for us to be the manga, right? Like
We got like a multi-meaning with this, right? Like we know a bunch of people aren't gonna, do the work, right? Just like a bunch of people will watch Sam Sulek in his bodybuilding videos, and they're not going to go to the gym. And I think that's okay. It's not like a criticism of the group of people, But I also want part of our show to be like, I value their opinion. I trust what they do. Maybe they're kind of like entertaining and smart. Like, I really do want to get some group of people to be like, man, maybe I will read this. All of the things that we're experiencing, like, you can get the facts about stupid easy with like chatbots, right? Like, but you can't experience the experience without going through the experience. The experience of like reading this, putting it down, sitting with something, and then coming back to it later. That's what's meaningful about this. It's not, hey, a dude got hurt and then died and then felt bad about it. It's like,
Right, that won't be
living
the
that.
ChatGPT summary of the book, right? Yeah, I agree. I feel like it is so much like for me meaningful to like keep track of all the Russian names and to like digest the sentences in the book rather than to read the ChatGPT summary of it. And it's a very simple story.
It is disarming in its straightforwardness.
Being able to tell this very like straightforward story arc with enough interesting detail is craft.
Especially as a translation. Shout out to the translator.
And then we have our next book, which we will talk about in 2 weeks' time because Cameron's traveling.
I got it. Keep talking. Keep talking. Got the energy.
We have There Is No Anti-Memetics Division by QNTM.
It's a book about anti-memes. If you haven't ever heard of the SCP Foundation, it is a public science fiction kind of experiment that's been growing on the internet for, I think, like 2 decades now. There's a world beyond this world, kind of like Twilight Zone-ish, and there's a organization that is internationally trying to keep everybody safe. This is a collection of different short stories that has been molded into one narrative arc about one of the vignettes of, hey, this really dangerous thing has escaped, and this group of people that work in what's called the Anti-Memetics Division have to stop it. But like the hallmark of this universe is that anti-memes are ideas that can't really extend beyond the life of the conversation you're having them in. The trick that recurs throughout the book is the characters in the book don't really understand they're in this story arc. And so every scene they have to relearn, I have this job. It is a world-saving tier job. And now I got to react to this crazy situation with basically no prep. It is a fun meta concept of like anti-memes in a world of viral memes on the internet. And like, what does it mean to have communities that have good ideas, but maybe you don't want them to leak out into the rest of the world because they can't appreciate them in the way that like you really need the context for. There's a bunch of elements of like dark forest, like conflict, that you kind of talk about in here. It's just great writing in general. There's great metaphors in here. And it's just like an interesting book experiment in an era where we kind of need more interesting book experiments.